And you'd hear your parents talking as a kid, you know, you're going to bed and you're tossing and turning. And that sort of, those sort of hushed conversations of anxiety that parents have. Yeah. And knowing that your father's essence is masculinity, all these words that I didn't know at the time, but you were aware. You know, when you're the only son and your dad, he's the most important person in the world. And I was really aware that something humiliating was happening inside him.
Welcome to Ireland Unfiltered. This week's guest is David McWilliams. I'm going to go straight into the interview because we had a wide-ranging discussion with David about property, about economics, about people's motivation, about Brexit, about Northern Ireland, about what needs to happen in Ireland, north and south, if there's to be a united Ireland. So I'm just going to get straight into it. Before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the show on all the usual channels and to give us a review if you can. Okay, here we go. David, welcome to Ireland Unfiltered.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dion.
Looking back over your last, say, 10 years of writing, there's something that struck me about what you were saying and maybe your point of view over the last 10 years. Like in 2010, you were saying financially and politically, Ireland is a conservative country. You were talking about insiders and outsiders. You felt that the government and the establishment were trying to discredit you over various aspects along with the bank guarantee. And then last year, you talked about the story of Ireland being the victory of individual hope over collective faith.
Yeah.
And I was wondering
what that sort of
what transition was and what changed in you.
I think if you go back to the boom period, it's very clear that Ireland doesn't particularly like somebody, the establishment, to come out and tell them not only they're wrong, but in actual fact, what is building is a massive bubble at a time when people felt it was a real change in the underlying economy. And I thought, no, look, this is simply a credit bubble fueled by extraordinary vested interests. It was kind of so transparent at the time. And that having looked around the world, this was going to end very unpleasantly. And then, of course, you get the sort of the crash period and then those years just after the crash, so 2008 to 2010, where it did seem to me that it was a game of insiders and outsiders, that basically Ireland could be divided up to those people who had a stake in the society and those who hadn't. And those who hadn't were largely the people who were left on the dole or who were left in negative equity or who emigrated in huge numbers. But I think in the last couple of years, since this economy started to recover, there's been quite a profound change in the society. And this had been bubbling along. And the interesting thing about the Celtic Tiger period, it was just an aberration. It actually deflected from what was really going on here. So if you think about economic growth as a sort of a long-term upward trajectory, okay, and which has been the case since the late 80s at least, since the late 80s. And then the Celtic Tiger is this sort of aberration where Irish people, we thought, or at least we were sold the myth that we could get rich buying and selling little bits of Ireland to each other with other people's money. And that was an economic boom, but obviously it wasn't, it was just a bubble. So that kind of tended to push things off. And the society takes quite a while then to rebalance itself. But what strikes me is that the long-term prognosis for Ireland is one where gradually the state and the church, which I think is very important in economics, I think it's much more important than people think, have been usurped by the individual. So if you take the state and nationalism and Catholicism as two really, really strong ideologies, which I believe compressed the economic potential of the country for many, many years, because I think the economy and personal liberty tend to go together. So the more liberal the country is, the more open it is, the more tolerant, the more likely you are to have an economy that backs itself and individuals who back themselves within that. So I've always thought that we went from what you probably call, Dion, a know your place society, which is the one that I was a kid in, to now, which is something more like a have a go society. And what has basically happened is you have had, and I think the church and state thing is very important in that, the culture war in that rather than have some massive change in the way in which Ireland is governed, what we had was what I call in my last book, The Renaissance Nation, these millions of little mutinies going off in the minds of Irish people. They say, you know what, I'm not putting up with that stuff anymore. I've changed my mind. But what happens in the Irish establishment is always a extraordinary weakness for what I would call the big man in history approach to economics. So some really clever person in the civil service pulls a lever and suddenly all the little gremlins in the economy react accordingly, and all the kudos goes to the great leader. And I think that's because a lot of the political commentary in the country is driven by people who spend a lot of time in Leinster House. Yeah, right. So that's their world, you know. So they have to have this, there has to be some sort of cause and effect. Whereas my own sense is that once the state gets the basic things right, if the society is becoming more liberal, more open, more tolerant, and that goes from the abortion referendum to gay marriage to all sorts of liberal moments, that what you will find is, and you see this all over the world, is that the economy tends to react brilliantly. And these are coincidence. Sometimes liberalism leads economics, sometimes economics leads liberalism. But it's a very interesting way of, I think, explaining what has been going on for quite a while now. And I suspect the Celtic Tiger was just an aberration. Right. And it was driven by a kind of, as I said at the time, that an unholy alliance of bankers, the state, and developers.
So whilst the growth since the 80s was those little,
those little moments.
Those little moments. What happened during the boom was something else entirely. It was a kind of corporate thing.
Yeah, well, I think that if you look at economic history, which I think is always important to give yourself ballast when you're analysing things, and you look at societies and countries that seemed to get this trading, mercantile, globalising world right, the first example was Holland. Yeah, Holland in the late 1600s, early 1700s. This is the first time that a society begins to actually expand commercially, and more importantly, the fruits of the economy begin to percolate down, at least modestly, to the average guy. Yeah. And where you can see is in every society that this happens, which is really the holy grail of economics, that people get wealthier and people get better expectations and better dreams about their future. There is a separation of church and state, and there is also a respect for the individual. Not individualism as, let's say, Mrs. Thatcher would obsess about, but respect for the individual, and much more importantly, a dignity offered to commercial self-endeavour. Okay? So commercial self-expression is this idea that, for example, JOE.ie is a good example. Like 10 years ago, if you said that we'd be sitting here without a TV license, okay, in a studio in Dublin 8, without a board made up of politicians and their cronies, etc., you'd said no way. But in actual fact, the changes that have happened in the last 10 years facilitate this, one of which is technological, but also it's this idea of the expectations we have about where our place is in society and what we can do. So I think all these come together. And what has struck me recently is the way in which Ireland became a liberal country gradually. So what you have is a very strange thing. You have the Irish establishment is still conservative. Yeah. The way in which the country is run is still very conservative. It's always behind it. But the people have actually been more liberal for a long, long time. And every plebiscite since, let's say, 93 has gradually but relentlessly erred towards tolerance, openness, liberalism. And what we see is the state catches up. And I think, for example, a great device the state used in the last 18 months, when I say the state, I mean the Oireachtas state used was the Citizens' Assembly, which is actually a very, very good way of saying, how do we dip our toe in this really dodgy area? I mean, it has got huge advantages.
Well, that was how it was perceived, wasn't it? That this was a way of the government kind of taking a view at arm's length of something they didn't want to handle.
Precisely. So this is what I'm saying is that, all the time, the apparatus of state, the government and the permanent administration is conservative and is scared and doesn't take risks. Whereas all the time the people are much more inclined to be more liberal and tolerant than the state allows itself to believe.
But is that easier to manifest itself in those areas of social policy, like abortion and marriage equality, where it takes one action, a referendum, and things change, whereas economically things still depend on that conservative state?
No, they do, and I think conservatism isn't a criticism; it's just an observation of the way the machine works.
But when you talk about it, things moving and the little mutinies and all that, people would look at something like housing and think, well, there is a divided country between
absolutely,
people who have it as wealth and have it and can't get on the ladder at all.
Well, this is something that you started by saying over the last 10 years. This is something over the last 20 years has become almost an obsession of mine, which is the extraordinary stranglehold that the property interest has on the society.
Yeah.
And I went away. I lots of things. I worked in the central bank when I was a young fella. Then I went away to the UK, but I also, in that period, travelled a lot. I was working for a large outfit that sent me on all sorts of really interesting experiences around the world. And I always looked at the very successful economies are economies that don't become beholden to feudalism.
Yeah.
So what we have in Ireland is like a feudal state where the interests of the land owning, not class, but the land owning sector dominate everything. So we still enjoy, kind of forget this in Ireland, the advantage of being one of the least populated countries in Europe. Yet we have the fastest rise in house prices and amongst the most expensive land. So that makes no sense economically. So therefore, if it makes no sense economically, you have to go and say, well, why is this? And why it is the actual interests of people who own land are at every juncture, every single juncture, whether legally, whether it's policy-wise, whether it's bias, whether it's the banking system, are always given primacy over the worker. Okay, and the interesting
they're also probably more likely to vote than anybody else.
Well, if you think about it, we can come back to that in a second, but if you think about the conceptual idea, so in this society, and again, I look at what we're doing here, okay, what really drives economics, the most important and impressive economic machine in the world is this little mad thing between our ears called the human mind, creativity, okay? That's where it all comes from. That's the alchemy of economics. When this thing works, everything works, right? And as a consequence of that, in a slightly strange globalized world that we live in, okay, we should always elevate the power of human creativity and give it a chance. But what we do in Ireland is we've decided that wealth comes from the land. Now this is incredibly feudal. This is like the Normans. This is actually what the Normans did, right? You take the land and say, I'm the boss man because I have a big farm or I have loads of land. And land is really interesting, Dion. It's an economic resource. You can only do two things with it. You can either use it or you can hoard it. Okay? And when you hoard it and when you allow people and encourage people to hoard it, obviously it doesn't get used and the value, the speculative value goes up. And that's exactly what has happened here. And if you construct a banking system that uses land as collateral, exclusively as collateral. So you can't use these mics, you can't go into these mics and these cameras and say, here, listen, I've got a few hundred quid or a few thousand quid's worth of gear here. Can I use that as collateral for a gig I'm going to do? No, you can't do that. You can say, I have a flat. Okay? So suddenly the entire liquidity of the financial system is tied up in the property market. And this, I believe, has dragged us back. And what I'm always wondering, when I'm on the bus or on the DART or whatever, is can you imagine how good this place could be to live in if we got the land thing right? So the land thing is a management issue. It's not an economic issue. We don't have an excessively growing population. We don't have overcrowding, okay? What we have is a land lobby. And there is a really interesting way of looking at this. There's a solution to all this. And it's the idea of a site value tax, which we can come on to, I can tell you in a minute, which is that you take, for example, if you're hoarding land, take, for example, the impact, I was reading the other day in the paper, the impact of the Lewis on property values, right? So the Lewis is paid for by you and me, but it doesn't go by our house, but that's okay, right? But think about property values have skyrocketed for those people who are lucky enough to have their houses beside the Lewis, okay? But they didn't pay for it.
Right.
We paid for it. So rather than the society gaining from the public investment, where the actual wealth is captured is in the fortunate landowner who happens to live on the site where the Luas goes by.
Yeah.
So therefore, everybody pays, the commune pays the community, but the actual gains are taken by the individual. But if you were to tax not the house, but the site on which the house is, suddenly what you do is, A, you reduce the obsession with hoarding land, you begin to use land, and you fix the problem overnight. Like, for example, you take around this part of Dublin, dereliction. I'm always intrigued by this. Like, dereliction, I think, is just kind of vandalism for the landowning classes, right? And by that I mean, you look all around Dublin, you look around Cork, you look around Limerick, you look around Galway, any of our urban cities, Waterford, the 3 stories over the front door, they're all empty. They're derelict. And why? Because we allow dereliction, because we don't penalise dereliction. And the reason you penalise dereliction, you put a tax on the site, right? So if your site is in the centre of town, you've got an expensive site. If you don't tax the site, there's no penalty there for dereliction. And you encourage the landlord just to hoard it, let it go to rack and ruin, and then sell it on to the next developer. So the interesting thing is, I've always thought that economics is the art of the possible. There's very little you cannot do.
Yeah.
There's very, very little you cannot do. And we're now in a world which you could call almost, Dion, capitalism without capital. You don't need huge amounts of capital.
But who in the example there of the Luas, who is paying the tax on the site then?
The person who owns the site.
So the property owner.
The property owner who owns the site. So not the house, but the site.
Okay.
So basically, if you take, for example, take Dublin 4. Why is Dublin 4 expensive? Right? Because if you take a house in Dublin 4 and a house in Darndale, cost the same to build.
Yeah, yeah.
The reason it is expensive, because Dublin 4 has the Dart, has St. Vincent's Hospital, it has UCD, it has shops, it is close to the town, it's got amazing bus routes going through it, and therefore the value, it is even at the Aviva Stadium, if that's your weakness, the value of property in Dublin 4 is not made by the owners of property in Dublin 4, but by the rest of us.
Yeah.
Okay? So consequently, the sites in Dublin 4 should be taxed very heavily because it means that the actual value, which is created by other people, goes back to the state. And therefore, you can change dramatically the rather bizarre Irish idea that your house is your pension, your house is your wealth, and you can begin to look at housing as accommodation. But accommodation is just a cost.
But will that ever happen in Ireland, in the political system we have? Like, you look at Ranelagh and the attempt to get
this is a great example. The Luas and the Metro.
The Metro, and a few residents in Ranelagh stop a capital project like that.
Well, the reason is you have one is, I think I call it in the book, bananaism, not NIMBYism. The banana means build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Okay, you take that. And you have this other thing called NIM2, which is not in my term of office. Yeah. Right? That causes gridlock. So what you have is a very crazy situation where, as you say, a number of hundreds of people, maybe not even, maybe a number of dozens of people can actually stop public infrastructure. I think this is almost unprecedented in the Western world, that politicians have engineered a situation where they regard themselves as culpable and responsible for public investment. And therefore there's a direct link between public investment and the 4-year electoral cycle. And then you superimpose on that we have this thing called PR, which is very democratic, but it means that even the big beasts of Irish politics, even the big people, they've got small majorities, maybe a couple of hundred here, and also the way Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael vote transfer, you're talking about very, very fragile margins. So consequently, the most dangerous group in Ireland, or the biggest threat to the Irish economy, is not the tax rate or Macron or Trump, but it's a residence committee. This is a terrifying thing. And what you've got to do is say, okay, we've kind of defined the reality. We know what the problem is. Let's do something about it. Because if you actually look at the figures, Ireland needs to build, given demographic trends and given the fact that lots and lots of people are staying single and that lots and lots of people are having 1 kid, maybe 2 at the most, later in life. We need to build about 2 million housing units over the next 50 years. That means building about 1 apartment block of 400 units per week in Dublin. housing about 2,000 people. That means housing the population of the Aran Islands every 3 weeks somewhere else for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So that's the extent of the challenge. And having a political stroke, local government stroke planning process, which is captured by this bananaism, means we won't be able to do that. And that has to change.
So, but you say it has to change. It won't change while that political system remains in place.
In which case we'll have another property market crash.
Which you think is likely?
I think that what the most things crash when they go up very quickly, right? That's it. You know, it's not that hard, right? Yeah. So if, for example, you take that analysis of what we need to build, given the population demographics, and you take this extraordinary problem here of the planning, the only thing that can happen is prices keep going up and up and up, okay? Unless we change this, right? And what happens as prices go ever higher, in order to achieve those prices, you have to borrow ever more. And the one thing we managed not to do in this last 10 years is overburden people with personal debt like the last time. Yeah. I can't see how that will remain the case if we don't fix this planning. So my sense is that you look around here, you look around Dublin, you know, you have this extraordinary amount of public land in inappropriate use. Yeah. So you take the Donnybrook bus garage, the Ringsend one, right? The one out in Clontarf, right? This is all ridiculous, having buses there. Buses should be miles out. Yeah. And, you know, so the state, there needs to be somebody. Now, that's why maybe the directly elected mayor in Dublin could be an interesting thing. If that individual or that office has got real balls and real power, I think that could change the dynamic profoundly.
But was the opportunity missed, or why was it missed after, you know, the last crash, when you would have thought that
you're right.
seismic event would have been a time when you would say, right, let's do everything differently, and instead every decision...
We doubled down on the last.
And then you look at something like NAMA and everything like that just seemed to contribute.
Well, this is what the original comment about the insiders was, that in the same way as the boom and the bust was caused by an insiders alliance, they doubled down very quickly in the recovery or the so-called fallout, and they emerged possibly stronger than ever. And that's why the analysis I always around that period was insiders versus outsiders. But despite that, the economy has recovered very strongly, and it's a totally different place. And this is why, as I was saying, when I'm contemplating Ireland, strolling down the pier, walking the dog, I think, imagine if we just got this land thing right. This could be an amazing place to live. And, you know, internationally, and the way trends in globalization and trends in technology seem to me to suggest that if we get this thing right, this country could be actually a really interesting place to live over the next 50 years. Not that I'll see much of it, but it could really be an interesting place to live.
If we get it wrong?
If we get it wrong, we are going to condemn ourselves to these periodic stop-starts. I mean, you know what's amazing is that the economy since the 1980s has grown as it did despite extraordinarily bad government, which I think comes down to something about the resilience of Irish people. And I really, really believe that. I've lived in a lot of countries, and I see what's happening in the UK now with Brexit, which is kind of like a nervous breakdown. Yeah. You know, Britain's having some sort of weird nervous breakdown. But there is an extraordinary resilience here. There is a creativity here, and there is a level of flexibility and kind of what I would say, you know, it's like when I teach my kids when they ask me, what's important, Dad, in life? And I'd say, just be resilient. Yeah. Be able to actually get back up. When someone kicks you down, it doesn't matter how hard you fall or how long you're down, as long as you get back up and are able to look that person in the eye, or those people in the eye, and move on. And I think there is a resilience here. I don't know where it comes from, but certainly the economic performance over the last 30 years, I mean, it's quite hard to overstate that in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Irish incomes on average were half of those of Western Europe.
Yeah.
And we have now caught up. And no other country's done that. Not Spain, not Portugal, not Greece. So it's something, you say, oh, it's a European Union membership. No, it's not. It's something interesting, something extra. And I think it is this culture war, it's these little mutinies, it's the liberation that basically, if you look at the first 100 years of this state, the first 70 years, this was the worst performing economy in Europe. The worst.
Yeah.
Not the second worst, and the third was the worst, okay? Because of this oppressive dogma from the top. Yeah. And the dogma was ubiquitous, and it was in academia, it was in journalism, it was always besmirching individual effort and creativity and commercial self-endeavour. And now that that's gone, there's a sort of, it was as if Ireland was just waiting to be allowed to do its thing. And that's why I celebrate the last 30 odd years, because I think it's been quite an achievement. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves the, I don't know, it's not respect. It's, we don't give ourselves the due gratitude that things have worked extremely well. There is a weakness, I think, in this country for allowing notions of the perfect to bully the good. Okay?
Yeah.
So when things are going well and are pretty good, they're not perfect. There's always somebody say, yeah, but, right? There's notions of the perfect. So, and I think that
would it not be the people who are, who would legitimately say that things aren't going that well for them? People who can't afford to buy property, or being priced out of even decent rental accommodation.
No, I understand that, but I'm just saying is that it's important to see the totality of the picture.
Yeah.
And see, for example, in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, in the late 1970s, 20% of Irish women went to work in full-time jobs. 20%. Yeah. That is the same level of female participation as in Afghanistan today, as in Saudi Arabia today.
So, but so we were very backward.
We're very backward.
And now we're not so backward anymore.
Now no, I think we're more than not so backward. I think the society, as evidenced by immigration, immigration is the great barometer. Yeah. People go to countries that are working. They don't go to countries that are not working. Yeah. Okay. We have taken in more immigrants per head in the last 10 years than any other European country, including Germany taking in all the Syrians. Okay, it's now 18% of the Irish population are foreign born. This is a phenomenal figure. And these are things that I think, while not disparaging at all the difficulties, and they're all in the land market. This is what I come back to. Every problem here stems from the land lobby. Everything else is eminently fixable. And this is a management issue.
I want to get on to other things, but I want to finish on just the housing on one thing. We had Micheál Martin on this show a while back, and he said he felt that the lack of, or the reluctance to build local authority housing was a class issue.
It is a class issue.
Do you think you agree with that?
I mean, Ireland is an endemically class conscious society. We let on that we're not. But everything, in fact, a lot of things I write about is class. Yeah. I think that this notion, I remember being brought up in an estate called Windsor Park in Monkstown. And Windsor Park was a 3-bedroom semi-estate of 100 houses, just slightly above Rory O'Connor Park, which is the council estate across Monkstown Road. Yeah. And the people, my parents and their generation, who bought their houses for 1,200 quid, right, were damned if they were going to be in any way associated with Rory O'Connor Park and Pierce Phyllis and Monkstown Farm. So what did they do? They sat around and they tried to come up with a name for the estate, right? This was in the 1950s. And they alighted on the most English name you can get, Windsor fucking Park, right? Okay? And that was all about class. That was all the lower middle class terrified that they'd be mistaken for a council estate because the houses look kind of broadly the same. Yeah. And of course, and the house, and the really funny, the estate beside was Ashton Park and the estate beside was Richmond Park, right? Yeah. And this was all giving your two fingers to any estate that was called after a patriot or a priest or a revolutionary, right? So I've always been interested in class, and because I played a huge amount of schoolboy football and mixed a lot, I've always thought that, and you know, Dunleary, Monkstown, that neck of the woods is an unusually mixed area class-wise, you know? Yeah. So I've always thought that, well, I think Micheál Martin's onto something. I don't see what is wrong at all with building large-scale corporation houses, council houses, call them whatever, as we used to do. The state builds them, takes a modest rent from the people, from the tenants, gives them security. Maybe you might not go down the idea of buying council houses. That might be because that I think is choked off the market.
Yeah.
But you're saying in this new phase, what we're going to do is we're going to do like Vienna does, or most European countries. We have large scale social housing. We regard housing as accommodation, not as a vector towards wealth accumulation. We therefore change the mindset around hoarding land. And people say, I don't want land, it's a pain in the arse. Right? You have to make land a pain in the arse.
Well, you've said this, that of the, 50 billion in tax revenue Ireland takes, 500 million or something comes from...
1%. 1%. So if you take every year, it costs 50 billion to run this country, right? Okay. And taxes and social welfare and everything. About 20 odd billion comes from tax on wages, income tax. About another 13 billion comes from VAT. And about 7 or 8 billion comes from excise duty on food or on booze and fags. And 1% comes on the single most divisive wealth generator in the country, land. It makes no sense. If you even look at the wealth disparities in Ireland, that 87% of all wealth in Ireland is in either property or land and nothing else. So it's it's there staring us straight in the face. And then the question is, how do you reverse that, change people's attitude without going down the Venezuela road, going down the Cuban road? And you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be appropriating land, or you don't want to be taking people's assets, but gradually introducing site taxes could change everything. And I think all this is coming.
Okay.
I'm an optimist about this. I think that you can't do stupid things indefinitely.
Right, okay. That's a kind of an optimistic note. Take me back then to Windsor Park. Your father's family came from Scotland.
Yeah, my grandparents are Scottish. They emigrated. I think they were the only people who emigrated into Ireland in the around the time of the First World War. Largely because my grandparents were what they called a mix. They were Scottish. They were from a mixed marriage. One Protestant, one Catholic. And anybody who knows anything about Scotland, Scottish football, will understand that sectarianism is very, very deep in Scotland, maybe even deeper than Northern Ireland, or as deep. And again, at the Edwardian turn of the century, it was very, very deep. And my grandparents came to Dublin, which was kind of an oasis of liberty. We don't ever think about that. You don't think that Dublin was actually quite a liberal city. And they also came to work. All my relations, my Scottish relations, a lot of them were stationed in Dunleary in the Royal Navy.
Right, okay.
And they told my granddad, who was a painter and decorator, that there were all these wealthy people lived in Dalkey and Killiney, and he would make a fortune. Actually, it was the Admiralty. It was the actual Admiralty of the British Navy, lived around Killiney, and that there was always good work for a painter and decorator doing up those swanky houses. So my granddad and my grandmum emigrated here, and again, around the time of the Rising, actually, just before the Rising.
Okay.
So it was an unusual move, and they were a mixed marriage, so they would have been kind of unusual in the locality. And my dad was born in Dalkey, where my granddad had a little paint shop, a little painter and decorator shop. And my dad went on to live in Dalkey all his life. He passed away about 10 years ago. And he bequeathed with me this football obsession. He set up Dalkey United with a couple of mates. And this flows deep in my genes. My mum's from West Cork. She's a school teacher. And so you'd know that combination of Scotland and West Cork is probably as far away. My dad was actually born in Antrim. On the way over here, as my granny was doing, I always found it amazing. My granny was heavily pregnant, visiting relations in the islands of
really.
So my dad was born in Antrim, and so you get the kind of Antrim gene and the West Cork gene. These are probably as far away as possible for any two creatures from in Ireland.
But what was their life like? You say they were a curiosity. Like Dalkey, at that time, I'm kind of conscious. I've read a lot of Hugh Leonard's work, and
Hugh Leonard's brother, the guy called Nick Keyes, was a very good friend of my dad's.
Really?
Yeah, he was a gardener. Very, very nice man. Died early. Died in his 60s. He was a really nice guy. He's from Begnitz Phyllis, where basically is the the big estate in Dalkey, and they were all contemporaries.
But Leonard always portrayed Dalkey, even though he never left it and he was obsessed with it, he always portrayed it at that time as a very kind of Valley of the Squinting Windows type village.
Yeah, I suspect it could have been. I don't know. I mean, we're talking Ireland in the 1920s and 30s. It was pretty squinting. It was and pretty. I don't know much. My grandparents passed away, both of them, early. I mean, I didn't know them, but it's interesting now that Shannon and I do the book festival in Dalkey. You know, you're much more aware of the history of the place, and because my grandparents moved there and my dad was born there and all his brothers and sisters. We've a big extended family in Dalkey. You know, it's like a big country family up there, and I'm really fond of the place. I think it's I think Hugh Leonard was probably right. I think he was probably more analytical than most. I think there was a very good scene in Da of him going down from Iblana, CBS, and getting on the scholarship, and then being on the fast track. Because he was a very clever fellow. But I think if you're from Dalkey and you know that part of the world and you see Martin Sheen in Da, it does bring a lot of things back to you. And I remember playing football there in the 80s, and you know it was very much of a country town. And you knew who was from there and who wasn't from there. Now it's much more ritzy and more chic. But there still is an element in Dalkey and in Dún Laoghaire in general, which I really missed when I was away. Actually, when I lived abroad, I missed it, and I love just strolling around that neck of the woods. I get a lot of my ideas from pottering around the borough, you know, which is obviously not the most glamorous place in the world, but there you go.
But your dad lost his job when you were 10, was it?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time. Because, and it has, Dion, it's only in later life you understand this. You know, when you're a kid, you're aware of things. So my father worked because his dad was a painter and decorator, he worked in the paint industry, paint and chemical industry. So he worked in Irish industry, okay? And Irish industry has been the single most neglected sector of the Irish economy, particularly through the 70s and the 1980s. Where Irish farming was on the pig's back after joining the European Union, and the Mandarin class, who never made a thing in their lives, this is the civil servant class, had these great delusions of grandeur that we'd leave the sterling zone and we'd join the German mark, and interest rates could go up if they wanted, and exchange rates could go up, but this was all about some big pan-European idea. But in the middle, Irish industry got crushed, because most Irish industry exported to England. So if our exchange rate went up against England, our interest rates went up against England, those businesses went out. And my dad worked in a number of those businesses, one of which went bust. I only know this later. But for me as a child, the most debilitating or difficult thing was my dad put on a shirt and tie and pretended to go to work for about 2 years because of the shame of being unemployed. Because very few dads on the road were unemployed. And I asked him in later life, what did he do, you know, when I got older? And I was only about 10, but you're aware, it's interesting. When you're a child, you're much more aware of what's going on than your parents think. And you'd kind of hear your mum and dad talking, and there would be those...
And did your mother know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was only for the neighbour. It was
for the neighbours, you know, that's Ireland. This is the squinting windows, you know. And you'd hear your parents talking as a kid. You know, you're going to bed and you're tossing and turning. And that's those sort of hushed conversations of anxiety that parents have. And knowing that your father's essence is masculinity, all these words that I didn't know at the time, but you were aware. You know, when you're the only son and your dad, he's the most important person in the world. And I was really aware that something humiliating was happening inside him. And the interesting, as a son, you don't care. As a kid, you're like, Dad, I don't care if you've a job or not. You're still my dad. I want to play football in the back garden with you. I want to walk up the hill with you. I want to, and he used to go on walks. He told me he used to go down to Wicklow to walk on the beach, to be anywhere where he didn't see people.
God,
and I think that now, as I get older, I'm about the same age now as he was then, actually. You realise that this was all very, very emotionally incredibly difficult. And one of the reasons, and I'd never understood, people always ask me, how did you get into economics and how did you fall into it and la la la. One of the reasons was I kind of wanted to understand this system that could say to a really good man, like a really decent bloke and a really nice fella, that you're redundant. You're no longer necessary. And that was happening all over the country. So hundreds of thousands of Irish people have seen their dads laid off. Hundreds of thousands. And I've always felt, therefore, that it's so incumbent on us to get the economy right. Because unemployment has profound emotional and psychological impacts that are long-lasting. They're intergenerational. So therefore, one of the reasons I'm kind of passionate about economics, and people always say, geez, David, you're teaching in Trinity, and you're doing this, and you're still passionate, is because I think it's important to get it right, because it's not just numbers. Economics is about people. And when the economy doesn't work, people suffer really badly. And the psychological and mental health, which was not a word we spoke about then, ramifications of bad economics are incredibly deleterious, which is why I always find the Mandarin class a little bit duplicitous when it comes to the economy, because they've no skin in the game. You know, if you're never going to lose your job, like I've been self-employed for 20 years, you do a gig, if it works, great. If it doesn't, you're out, you're gone. There is a Mandarin class here that have no skin in the game. They have no personal ramification for any of their decisions. And that infuses a lot of my thinking about the society.
Did it make you angry as you got older? No,
it doesn't make me angry, because people who know me will always know that anger is something I'm blessed. I don't get angry. I don't get angry at all. My missus always finds it amazing. It's not that I've like a Zen Buddha-like character. I'm not at all. But anger is something that I think that anger is really the opposite emotion of rage. And rage and anger together are really a sign of impotency, a sign of no sovereignty, you've no control. So when I see young fellas getting angry, it's because they've no control. And I've always felt that it's important to at least try as an individual to control that little bit of the zone that is your own world, and then not to get angry. But the question was, did I get angry about this as I got older? No, but I became more analytical and actually more determined. You know, so when I come up against and when I'm faced with the sort of the Mandarin class, the higher civil service class, I'm always aware that they don't have skin in the game.
And you said that it made you determined never to have a boss.
Yes.
Was that? But did it also make you determined that you would always know your own worth and know your own value, and you wouldn't be pushed around in that regard?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you see when you're a kid and you see your dad being told by somebody that they have no worth, and you realize what dependency does to you. I think somewhere deep inside you, and it comes from, it's hard to know where it comes from, comes a sort of an inner strength not to be dependent on anyone at all. That you'll always be disappointed by fellow workers, not by humans, not by your mates, not by your family, but people you work with are always going to disappoint you. And when the shit hits the fan, very few people put their hands up and say, I'm going to watch Dion's back. That never happens. They scurry off to the next gig like, you know, it's like your mates in a work situation disappear like snow off a ditch when things go wrong. So I've always been aware of that. It's human nature. I don't expect anybody to do it. So therefore, I've maybe become much more aware of working for yourself and not depending on other people, because I see what happens. I have a lot of mates, for example, who during the recession lost their jobs, they lost their houses, and it was because they were excessively dependent on other people in effect. And so I've always thought, you know what, if you can, it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's a mindset, right? But if you can be a sovereign individual, by sovereign I mean if you can get up in the morning and say, okay, let's try and figure out what we're going to do today, then I think I'd encourage particularly younger people to realize that, and particularly now in this sort of more precarious world, to realize that if you can figure out what you're good at or what you enjoy doing, you will never, ever, ever work a day in your life, number one. If you enjoy doing something, you're going to be good at it.
Yeah.
Right? What I've always found is, when I was a kid, I really wanted to do keepy uppies, but I could never do it, right? And fellas who could do 20 of those, right? And they enjoyed it because they were good at it. Yeah. And then they got better at it. And it's the same for work, right? If you find something that you really love, then do it, because you will be good at it. And it won't feel like work. And once you're good at it, people will employ you. This is why I worry a lot about social media and people spending a lot of time on Instagram and all that sort of stuff. How many likes do I have? How many followers? Blah, blah, blah. Whereas, a restaurant that is doing well and getting all these likes is doing well because it's making food really well. So, in actual fact, any of the sort of social media or acclamation or anything that you get after that is nothing to do with social media. It's actually to do with doing a good job. So I'd always try to say to people that find out what gets you out of bed in the morning. Yeah. And do it. Like my daughter sings for a living. She wants to be a DJ. She's into all that sort of stuff. She's in music college. She loves it. Whereas the career guidance people said in school, oh my God, well, you shouldn't do that. Music, my goodness, you shouldn't sing. Yeah. And I'm saying, well, that's what she likes to do.
What you love, do what you love.
Yeah, do it.
You went away. You mentioned you went away. You went to London. You went around the world.
I went to I lived in Russia for quite a while. I lived in Israel for a while. I worked a lot in Serbia. I was lucky. I did one of those I always think that Irish people were such good spoofers that London is full of nervous. The city of London is full of nervous Irish lads in corner offices waiting to be found out. Right. Yeah. Because like the Brits are so easily taken in. You go to an interview in England and you'd say, Nigel would say, "Well, sir, can you do that?" Oh, geez, of course, I do it in my sleep. And I remember at in my 20s having that sort of sense of, the world is out there, let's go for it. And I lived a lot, and I do still work. I'd say I do about 70% of my work is abroad.
And why did you come back?
I came back. My missus and I decided to come back to Ireland. Shannon had never lived in the South. It's quite funny. Come back to Ireland. Okay. She never lived in. She's from Belfast, and she didn't really know the Republic at all. And I think it was just a sense of adventure. I think we were petrified of having kids with English accents. Yeah, that was a no-no. Yeah. And also we looked at living in London, and which was great. We were living in London. We had a flat and all that, but I just thought that there was something attractive. Like a lot of Irish people, I like here. There's something that really attracts me about Ireland. It's something that kind of almost called me home. Yeah. Even though career-wise at the time it was a really ridiculous move. If you think of it in the round, you could have continued on a different career. But I kind of missed the place. I missed my mates. I missed my family. I thought that there was something interesting going on in Ireland around the year 2000. And then I got a job at TV3 doing, and I'd never presented a show before, and I commuted from London initially.
Okay, did you?
Yeah,
right, okay.
yeah. And then I said, let's do this for the crack, and I kind of fell into this media game because I was an economist working in these large institutions before that. But again, to come back to the point, I always felt that I never really wanted the corner office. I remember coming in and thinking, I don't want to be that bloke at 50 odd. Yeah. I didn't know what I wanted to be now that I am that at that age, but I certainly didn't want to be the suit who stabbed his way up, which usually was what happens in big firms. People get to the top by politics, not by ability.
So you came back and the Celtic Tiger was taken off.
It was roaring away, yeah.
And you've talked about this before, about how it became, you were sort of toxic as you started to warn about what was happening.
Well, it was very weird because I suppose I went away a kind of a kid, really. I'd worked in the central bank for a while, and you come back an adult and it's a different you're a different person. And I had seen these credit bubbles before. I'd worked a little bit in Asia. I'd also analysed a lot what was going on in Asia. I'd analysed a lot what was going on in Israel. I'd done it. We'd seen the kind of transition economies, all these sort of things. And I thought, this is it. This is a textbook economic example of gross financial mismanagement, which can only end one way. And I wouldn't say toxic, but I just think that, you know, Ireland is small. I don't necessarily hang around with journalists or economists or people who are in this business. But every now and then you might go into town and particularly I think 2004, 2005, 2006. And it's not my nature to be the person who says, you know, I want to piss on your parade.
Yeah.
I'm actually much more go with the flow individual in my private life. But I did detect, well, I didn't, not that I detected, it was evident, a certain amount of animosity, because it's like a group trip, you know, everyone tripped at the same time. They're all coming up together, they're all buzzing together, you know, and you don't want to be the first saying, I'm going to wreck your buzz here. But it seems like a long time ago now. It's the interesting thing, and I think this is interesting, Dion, is that the society that was then, let's say 2000 to 2010, is a totally different society because of technology. Technology has changed the world. So, for example, I'm always interested in looking at generationally. So my generation regards 2008, 2009 as the end of something. It was the end of the Celtic Tiger. It was the end of the housing boom. It was the end of free credit. It was unemployment. It was negative equity. It was all those things. But the generation coming behind me, or at least two behind me, right? The generation who were teenagers or kids there, 2008 to 2010 was the start of something amazing. It was the start of the smartphone. It was the start of social media. There wasn't, you think about Twitter, Facebook, all these things happened at the same time, right? So one generation sees a moment in history as the end, and the other generation sees a moment in history as the beginning. And I think the beginning, which was basically the internet in your pocket, has changed the experience of all of us, but particularly the generation coming behind me, extraordinarily. And in actual fact, it has, I believe, changed the economy for the better, because there's not that reliance on housing and banks and all that sort of stuff. But also, I think it's afforded lots and lots of opportunities. Not to say that it's all sunshine. It's not, and it's difficult. And if I were like 20 or 25 now, I feel I had a conversation with my kids the other day who are in their teenagers, and what I notice about them is they're quite anxious about what they're going to do with their lives at a much earlier stage than I was. I had no rashers. Like, I mooched along to college, did economics because I probably didn't get the points to do other things, you know, like repeated my leave and was, you know, mooching around, you know. I made a bollocks of it first time out, then second time said, oh, I better get my stuff together, right? And all my mates were the same. And people were working in bars and going to the States and acting the maggot. And there was no huge sense of career angst. And I asked my kids and I asked their mates, and they said that they are really aware of the difficulty of having a stake in this. They didn't articulate it this way. What they were saying is, like, Dad, like, I'll never get a flat. You moved out when you were 19. You look, they were talking to my mum, Granny, right, who's 84, and she was saying, sure, he was gone. He was 18 and never came back, right? We were talking, like, laughing. And my son, who's 17 next week, he was thinking, wow, you actually could move out. And he had no idea as the kips I lived in. Right. But the point is, you could do it. You could. The process of becoming an adult, and a kind of carefree adult, was definitely there. Now when I look at the generation in their 20s now, I see all the milestones about growing up. If you think about growing up, becoming an adult is you move out for your wherever you live, right? You get a gaff either with your mates or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whatever you're into, right? You get a job that pays you enough to pay the rent for that, and you become that, remember we talked about that sovereign individual, you become an adult, you grow up, right? Now, my generation, it wasn't easy, but it could all be done by 27, 28, right? You meet somebody, in actual fact, you meet the person you want to settle down with, and the notion of having kids and a family was all achievable, okay? Now when I look at the generation coming behind us, or at least two generations behind us, at least, let's say 20 years behind us, behind me, I see that those milestones, moving out, getting a job that pays you well, and I don't mean really well, I mean just enough, right?
Yeah.
Having your own gaff, getting up in the morning in your own place, meeting somebody, settling down with somebody, maybe having kids, all that's been pushed out until late 30s.
Yeah.
And I think psychologically, this precarious notion of the precarious grip they are having on society may manifest itself in strange developments later on. Even the precarious love life. I was talking to younger people about Tinder the other day. You know, I'm so delighted that I'm not in the Tinder age. I'd be fucking petrified. Yeah. But you know, this idea of just, you know, something better is going to come around. Someone better looking, someone cuter, blah blah, is going to come around. I'll just swipe it. That. Whereas in our day, you kind of, you're settled quite easily, and I think those. So if you have a precarious economic life, and you have a precarious adult life, and you have a precarious sex life, these are all very, very confusing things for all the time, and they're all coming at the same time as you're supposed to be becoming a responsible individual, not for everybody else, but for yourself.
But when you look at your son, who's at the same age you were when you moved out, you look at him and think, I couldn't let this boy move out now because of the natural parenting thing to look at somebody.
No. I actually think I'm amazed by that generation. I think they're really, really capable of doing amazing things.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying those kind of things that you assume so easily.
Well, this is why I want to get. This is why we start. We start with housing. This is how we start with land.
Yeah.
But this is corroding people's lives.
Yeah.
And I really mean it, you know? And the worst thing about it, it's rewarding older people like me and people older than me and penalising the young, where societies should be encouraging the young. Yeah. You know, not rewarding people for getting old. Getting old is not an achievement, right? That we all get old, right? It should be actually rewarding people. So I think that when I look at my kids' generation, and of course, because I work in a variety of media thing, you know, gigs, I'm working with lots of younger people all the time, which is great. Yeah. And you realise that your taste in music is particularly unfashionable. Your taste in everything is unfashionable. But I think that I worry about this not having a stake. Yeah. Because I think that your life goes quickly. Yeah. And things pass you by very quickly. And if you look, for example, the data in America show, which is kind of terrifying, that if you don't get your act together in your 20s. So, for example, if you're continuing to try and figure out your career in your 20s, so if you slip backwards in your 20s, you never recover, never, because your expectations, your own sense of your self-worth, is hugely important for people. And if you are pushed back in your 20s and it's precarious and you're not beginning the process of figuring out, okay, what do I love? Can I get a job here? Can I work here? How do I make a crust? The data from the States, and the States have much more longitudinal data than we have, because they've been taking surveys for years and research for years, and they're very data driven. It shows you that even by your late 40s and early 50s, you don't recover because your worth has changed, your sense of yourself. Okay. And so I worry about that, because I believe that the penalty for making mistakes now seems to be higher than in my day.
What do you mean?
So because the world is more competitive, like I have a whole load of mates who just made a total hames of everything from the age of 16 to 26, right? Yeah. And then eventually their looks sort of changed and they get a gig and they start out, and life has been fine. So the penalty for mistakes, I believe, in my generation was not as enormous as it is now. So when I teach at Trinity, and when I look at the CVs of the students, I would never have even got in the door of the place. Yeah. You know, like, what did you do during the summer? I kind of mooched around and worked in the kitchen. Whereas they're like, you know, I was on this and I'm doing this and an endeavour and I was leading this, you know. So this obsession, this commodification of the curriculum vitae is something that my generation didn't really suffer from. And excessive ambition was an unusual phenomenon when I was younger. Like someone would stand out.
Yeah.
And you'd be a bit wary of them, you know. You certainly wouldn't hang around with them.
Right.
We wouldn't go for a gargle with them. But now the pressure is huge. So, you know, I think then as a dad or whatever, then you've just got to try and ensure that your children at least have a sort of a place at home that they can come back to. And you try to encourage them and their mates. I mean, they're incredibly politically engaged. Like, it's interesting. I'm launching a new podcast, and we were doing an episode the other night, and all the teenagers came in, and they were, so what do you think of Brexit? What do you think of this? What do you think of that? And they're on YouTube, and they're reading Vice, and they're watching Russia Today, and they're watching all sorts of different media. They're watching Joe a lot. They're watching this, and their brains, they're this idea that they're all Kardashian-esque and shallow. It's not true.
Yeah.
They're really clued in.
We had Bret Easton Ellis on
how
weeks
was he?
ago. He was great. He was fantastic. He apologised to millennials for because he's been kind of going to war with millennials. But one of the things
I think he's wrong. I think they're a brilliant generation.
Well, he also, and that was the thing that was said. He did an interview where he said that they don't read, and actually they read more than previous generations, and they are. And I think
they just read different stuff, and they. I mean, they might not necessarily be reading the written word, like you know, a big 400-page book or whatever. Yeah. But I have huge confidence that there's something really interesting going on. But I think it's incumbent on the middle-aged, like my generation, to understand the anxieties of the young and not to dismiss them or belittle them or besmirch them. I think that's wrong, because I think that every generation. I remember interviewing Tony Benn, the old English socialist, many years ago when I was doing Agenda, and I probably looked younger than I was at the time. And he said to me, he said, "Well, young man," he said, "it's quite interesting." He said, "We have a lot in common, you and I." He said, "The young and the old, we have a lot in common." And I said, "What's this?" He said, "We're both bullied by the middle-aged." I thought it was a great quote.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Yeah.
And it's true.
And you talked about, again, we come back to things in the wake of, you know, the crash and that time, and quantitative easing being one of those things that has pulled up maybe the drawbridge for the next generation too, and kept people out. Yeah,
I think it's very interesting. So quantitative easing, which is again one of those mangled economic expressions, it's more it's a cash for trash scheme, right? The banks had all this trash on their balance sheets. The central banks said, okay, if we don't get that trash off their balance sheets, they can't lend, the economy can't recover. So what we'll do is we'll take all that stuff, we'll give them real money, and we'll reduce interest rates to zero. Yeah. And what that did was it reflated the balance sheet of the economy. So if you think there was what's called a balance sheet recession, right? Yeah. That after the crash, you have the assets here in your balance sheet and you have debts. And the assets collapsed in value, but the debt didn't collapse, right? So suddenly your debts were more than your assets, so therefore you went bust, right? Which has happened on a monumental scale. So the central bank said, okay, we'll reflate this asset bit, okay, we'll push this back up, and that's how we'll refloat the economy. And it ultimately worked. But if you reflate the economy using assets alone, then what you do is you enrich people who own assets, okay? And who owns assets? The already rich. That's why they own stuff. That's why they're rich. And therefore, on a demographic way, how this plays out is Ben Bernanke really saved his own generation. Yeah. He saved the baby boomers, who were the people who got really greedy and got the world into trouble, right? And he did so by inflating their assets, but leaving behind the millennials, who actually didn't have any assets. So basically, the middle-aged did very well, and the old, okay, or the oldish, but the young got frozen out. And it's no surprise then to me that we're now in the 10th year of the American bull market, okay? And everyone's going, isn't this fantastic? And, you know, you hear this on the news, stock market went up.
Yeah, Trump's always going to
Yeah, exactly. But in actual fact, the supposition there is that a growing stock market is good for the economy and it's good for everybody. But it's not. Yeah. It's only good for the people who own that. And also, more importantly, most people who own assets own houses in America. So I think that there's a direct link between the baby boomers, quantitative easing, and the fact that the American youth are going to the left. Right. Under, you know, AOC is the big, and she's really impressive. I mean, I watch her on YouTube and I just think this is a very interesting person, and it's really. And again, what happens is the middle ground throw all sorts of criticisms at her, right? But she is saying something. She's connecting with people. And Bernie, I did a gig for Bernie Sanders in November in Vermont, and it was really, really interesting. It was the Sanders Institute, of which I'm a fellow, and I went over there, and it was just interesting to listen to the left in America talking about where they're at, talking about the upcoming election. And although I wouldn't be, as I said to Bernie, and he's kind of laughed. I said, Bernie, I'm no socialist. He said, yeah, I know, but you think about these things. And that's enough for us. We'll see. I think.
But do you think that is something that is changing in America?
I think that Churchill. I think it was Churchill once said, if you're a socialist at 20, or if you're not a socialist at 20, you have no heart, and if you're still a socialist at 40, you have no head. Which I think was a little bit aggressive.
Yeah.
I think the only way in which we'll rebalance wealth inequality and give people a sense that they have a stake in society is by policies that would have been not at a place in the 1950s and 1960s, but would be regarded as quite socialist now.
Yeah, because the rules of the game seem to change for me when that happened, because it was that thing that people said, the privatization of profit and the socialization of loss. Suddenly you thought the game was played in a certain way,
and then you realize it wasn't.
Then you realize it wasn't, and the odds were stacked against, and the odds were in the favor of the banks.
But even since then, what you see is, and again, it's not just policy; it's also technology. Technology has amplified the winner takes all nature of markets. Right? Yeah, it's kind of the messification of work. So Lionel Messi is the best and he gets all the rewards, okay? Yeah. And then the people who are slightly second and slightly third, it's like, for example, you go to the League of Ireland. The guys who are playing there were the best players that you probably ever saw in school, ever, okay? And they were better than anybody else, and they had more skill, but they just weren't good enough. They're just slightly less good than the people in the championship. But in actual fact, I think they're probably better. I was watching some championship football the other day. It's dreadful shite, right? But the winner takes all markets are a function of technology and advertising, social media, all that sort of stuff, where the rewards go to the very, very top. And those people who are not at the very, very top end up fighting for a much more meager slice of the pie. So it's not just policy, it's also technology, it's also the change in which the way we use media. And that, I believe, has huge ramifications for politics and for democracy. Because democracy is based on the notion of one man, one vote, which is based on the notion of fairness. And if, for example, there is no fairness, and if, for example, the rich guy gets all the spoils, well, then eventually the poor guy is going to go into the polls and vote for the guy who says, or the girl who says, I'm going to get it all back for you. So democracy and fairness go together.
Well, there's studies this week. I was reading something about how faith in democracy is declining in across Europe and across the Western world.
Yes,
and it's directly linked. How much faith you have in democracy is linked to if you support populism or whatever, and if you support Brexit, you've less faith in democracy. That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, this is more dangerous than. When I say dangerous, I'm optimistic in the sense that I think that the ship will balance itself. Okay, I don't think this is the 1930s all over again. I know a lot of people do think that, but the interesting thing is that at its essence is the notion of fairness, and at its essence is if a society isn't fair or doesn't seem to be fair, it grinds to a halt. It's Antonio Gramsci, who's an Italian communist, who actually made the fatal mistake of being a communist under Mussolini. So Mussolini killed him. He put him in prison and let him rot there. But he was an incredibly interesting philosopher, really. And he said that life is a struggle between the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. And I really think this is the case. So intellectually, we are educated to be pessimistic to point out what's wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wrong and this is wrong. And it's this sort of, it's the Greek way of thinking. You actually disaggregate things. You have to prove things. There's a right answer. And our intellect, our brain is naturally pessimistic. And yet our will, human will, to get up out of bed in the morning and do things is naturally optimistic, right? So it's incredibly important that we keep the optimism of the will as the primary driving force, and we don't allow ourselves to fall back to the pessimism of the intellect. And part of optimism comes with the notion that I have a chance, that I get out of bed. Like, if you think about it, everybody has a dream. Every single kid has got a dream in life. You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to play football like Kenny Dalglish. It never happened, right? But, you know, or I want to do this and that. So every little kid, if you look at any school, you go into a class of 30 6-year-olds. In their head is this notion of self. This is me. You know, it could be called the ego, which is a very, very interesting thing. This is me, and I'm going to project myself on the world, no matter who that kid is, right? And all humans have this sense of expectation about life. And consequently, it's essential that those dreams are kept alive through the notion that if I work hard and get a few breaks and do the right thing, I can get on. But if you have an unfair society that's endemically unfair, then it crushes those dreams. And once dreams are crushed, it's very, very easy to say, well, you know what, I'm going to vote for that guy because he's the person who tells me that my self-worth is going to be rekindled by the political process, which you could call populism, you could call it any other ism. But I think that's the danger.
Can I ask you about the bank guarantee?
Yeah.
Do you think you were overly optimistic or maybe even naive in thinking that the bank guarantee would be implemented the way you wanted it to be implemented?
Yeah, well, I mean, the genesis is of that is, you know, basically, I spent the best part of 8 years saying that our banks would go bust. I also said the best part saying when our banks go bust, you will lose all your deposits.
Yeah.
So banks going bust is everybody loses everything. Okay?
Yeah.
The money disappears.
Yeah.
Right? And even up until the 11th hour, all the Green Jersey Brigade were saying, don't worry, it's going to be fine. It's fine. We're well capitalized, all that. And when Brian Lenihan came to me and asked me, and I'd met him on a radio show, I'd never met him before, and he said, look, he said, what's your number? Or give me your number or something. And I said, we could have a chat. I said, whatever. And when he arrived...
He arrived at your house?
It was I think it was the 2 days after Lehman, I think. And the Irish banks were bust.
Yeah.
They were losing money hand over fist. Now, in a crisis, the only thing you don't have is time.
Yeah.
Okay? Time is the most precious commodity. Okay? And when you run out of time, you run out of road. Okay? And when your banks go bust, everyone loses. So the question was then, how do you prevent the banks from going bust? So what you had was unbelievably, and in some cases, criminal behavior in the banking system, destroyed the balance sheet. Okay? So normally what happens is you have your own central bank, and that prints money and puts the money into the banks. Like it actually, it's like the process of putting money into an ATM. But we didn't have our own central bank. We were part of the ECB. The ECB wouldn't lend money to the Irish banks because they knew they were going bust and they didn't want to set a precedence, right? The other thing is you get somebody to buy your banks, but everybody said, we're not buying the Irish banks, right? Or you get somebody to put equity into the banks, buy chunks of them, they couldn't. So you're faced with a situation, what do you do? So then you think the most important thing to do in the eye of the storm, and again, all of this should have been figured out. Yeah. You know, I was writing this from 2004 that this is going to happen, right? And so basically the bank guarantee, it's a bit like you think, so I said, okay, let us guarantee everything for 2 years, right? It was a specific 2 years, okay? To buy time to see how bad things are, okay? Therefore, people will not lose their deposits. Therefore, the banks won't go bust. Therefore, you won't have a 1930s style. And then during that 2 year period, you figure out which are the bad ones. And then you bring all the bondholders in and you say, sorry, lads, we've no money, right? But you do it in a period of calm where you've bought time. as to why they decided to extend it for 5 years, 6 years, I have no idea. I mean, the interesting about Lenin is I only saw him once after that.
Oh, really?
Ever.
Yeah.
I never saw him again. And so I don't know what was going on in his head.
But did it frustrate you? Because, like you say, burn the bondhold, all these things that were necessary in your version of the idea weren't going to happen. Like in the real world of suddenly the carve-off happening and the insiders and outsiders, if you like. Yeah. That was never on the cards.
Well, it should have been on the cards because it would have been. This is basically, you can't have capitalism without bankruptcy. It's like having Catholicism without hell, right? Yeah. You know, you need some sort of mechanism. But I come back to the idea, in a crisis, when you run out of time, you're gone. It's over, right? So the question is, how do you buy time? Normally, you have made a plan for this. I was amazed. They had no plan. I remember looking at him and thinking, Jesus. And I felt really sorry for him as an individual because he was a lawyer. Yeah. It would be a bit like me being the Minister for Justice in a constitutional crisis. You don't know what to do. Yeah. And I've no idea why they butchered and that particular plan, and why they didn't realise that temporary is temporary for a reason. Yeah. And they didn't buy themselves time, and then they didn't bring all the creditors in and say, listen, lads, we've got these things called depositors. They're creditors in trust creditors. We're going to change the law. You fellas are gamblers, you're speculators. Do you know what? We've no money. And the interesting thing is that it wouldn't have made a jot of difference because if you look at what happens, if you take in creditors and burn the bondholders, and that makes your balance sheet better, then you recover quicker. Yeah.
And so, also it may have helped in repair that sense of disconnect
precisely
people felt.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and people were right. So I mean, and then, so again, that's comes back to this insiders and outsiders idea that with Brian Lennon, again, I never saw him again, so I don't know what was going on in his head. Yeah. So it is quite mad that I actually only met him twice in my life.
And that was it. And that was yeah. And were you frustrated by that? Because you did seem like that was like, not that you didn't meet him again, but that it had happened the way it had, and that he came out and said stuff about you then.
Yeah, look, I think that I don't think frustration was the emotion. I think total shock at the calamity of the Mandarin class. I come back to them, who have no skin in the game. Yeah. They weren't losing their jobs. They were actually getting promoted in some cases, okay? Yeah. And the laziness of that. You know, the expression, the urgency of now. Yeah. Now is urgent, right? Not tomorrow, not the next day, not 10 days hence. Now is urgent. And I thought that sort of nonchalance about the crisis. Yeah, yeah. And so it wasn't frustration, it wasn't anger, it was sort of eye-opening for me that I couldn't quite believe that they didn't know what they didn't know, which is a very dangerous thing. If you don't know what you don't know, you're a very dangerous creature, okay? Yeah. And that they had no idea about the workings of finance and how cross-collateralization and how leverage works and how financial markets worked. I was really shocked. Right. But then again, they'd never worked on it. I was lucky I'd worked on a trading floor. I know how those guys think. Yeah. And I also know that if you do buy yourself time, you can fix things.
I want to ask you finally about Brexit. Like you've written about how it's, you know, there's an opportunity for Ireland in it. And we might get to that in a sec, but I'm also interested in how you feel it has affected the dynamic between Ireland and England, because you mentioned there about, you know, people getting jobs in the city in London, Irish guys who could chance their arm. And I've always felt, and I lived in London, I always felt being Irish in London was probably easier than being Irish in Ireland.
Oh yeah,
you know, it was a doddle. And there's now a sense of like England is the enemy again, and it's
we really need to avoid that. Yeah. I mean, like I always thought being Irish in London when I was there in the 90s was like being a two-footed footballer, having a left and a right foot. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It was an advantage because they didn't know you class-wise, and there was a leniency towards us that they might not have had amongst themselves, and they have lots of English mates and all that. Also, my wife's from Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
She's from the Protestant side of the house. Her family are divided. Some voted for Brexit, some voted not. So I kind of lived the North much more than anybody. Not than anybody, but than most Southerners. Most Southerners I know have never been to Belfast.
Yeah.
They went once and they hightailed out of it and they never go back. And the further south you go, the less likely you are ever to have been in Ulster, let alone in northeast Ulster.
My grandmother was a Presbyterian from Newry who ended up living in Tralee.
Oh, wow. So she was a very exotic creature.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah. We should have got them together with my grandparents. They got on like a house on fire. But I think that, the northern
like this
element of Brexit I find very worrying. But I do think there will be a united Ireland sooner than we think.
But do you think that is, because you say that in Renaissance Nation, and the one thing that struck me about Ireland and the attitude to unionism is, the numbers are all going in one way.
Yeah, you've got to marry them. This is the best thing, right?
Yeah, but the attitude...
Have babies with unionists.
Yeah,
it makes them much of it.
Well, at least maybe sit down and talk to them, or even learn teach their history.
Yes.
Teach their history in schools, and, somehow...
Dion, I couldn't agree with you. I mean, when I look at the demographics, when I look at the numbers... When I look at the DUP, the DUP remind me of the religious right in America, that they're actually doubling down on purity because they know the change is coming. It's a little bit like the Catholic Church in the 1970s. The Catholic Church in the 1970s, I believe, sensed that something was coming. Yeah. This is when they started building those massive churches. When I was a kid, the only thing that was being built in Ireland were these huge churches, as if they were built for a coming Catholic generation of hundreds of thousands of people who never came. Yeah. Even the Pope's visit was a high point of, and then they doubled down on the divorce referendum and the abortion referendum. Was like, they knew it was coming and they were going to actually be more pure than the Pope, right? Yeah. I think the same thing's happening with the DUP. I think that they can see what's going on, they can see what's coming down the road, and they are now placing 5 large bets on the union, okay? But if we come back to where we started, the progression from religious observation and intolerance to tolerance in Ireland over the last 30 years has been dramatic. And if you had told me, or if you'd asked my parents, would that happen? They'd say, no way, right? Yeah. So some part of me is hopeful that in Northern Ireland, I can see my own nephew and, for example, my relations or whatever, that the same sort of journey that we went on could happen. That basically Sinn Féin and the DUP and that very hardline view is not necessarily representative. Basically what happens in the North is they cancel each other out. Yeah. Right? So you vote DUP, so your man's voting DUP, I'll vote Sinn Féin and vice versa, right? But to come back to your broader point about knowledge and understanding, I spent a lot of time with actually almost exclusively Northern Irish Protestants. And I've come to know them very well. I've come to understand them. I've come to understand their anxieties, which are very real, and their fears. I've also come to understand that they are a truly diminished tribe because they're a tribe without a leader. Yeah. And a tribe without a leader is a diminished tribe. What I hope will happen is a sort of almost an FW de Klerk will emerge from unionism and say, okay, here's the way things are going. But on the other hand, we need to be unbelievably generous towards them, and we need to understand them, and we need not to threaten them.
And is that an appetite there right now?
I think that this is what our leadership should basically be saying to us publicly. Look, if the United Ireland is your end game, this is what you want to happen, okay, you just have to wait. Right? So if you think about nationalism in Northern Ireland, it's got to wait. That's a really easy strategy. Unionism has got to figure out a way of dealing with this. But I think it's incumbent on us to welcome unionists, right? So there's no point in saying we're going to force you at the result of a border poll into something you don't want. I mean, we could do that, and it might end up that that's what happens. But wouldn't it be much more interesting if a significant minority of unionists said to themselves, let's cross that line. Let's join them. And it's like, you know, either we give them a hug or we give them a box.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I'd be more on the huggy side.
But that's the thing, and it strikes like Jarlath Burns was on a few weeks ago, and Jarlath is, you know, a nationalist from South Armagh, and his, you know, journey, as he says, has been to kind of understand unionism and to recognise, as you said, these fears that they have, and also maybe from down here to realise that, like, if there is a United Ireland, we're going to have to assimilate people who are going to be in position, you know, this unionist politicians that we look on so negatively are going to be, you know,
in the door.
They'll be tarnished as, or whatever, deputy prime minister, whatever way we have it. They will be in a permanent position.
Sammy Wilson could be the tarnished. This is not beyond the realms of possibility. So I think that you know, again, you know, my adult life has been a mixed Northern Irish Republic experience, which has been, I think, wonderful, and it's given me a huge insight into that tribe. And they are a tribe, okay?
But we're a tribe too.
We're a tribe, exactly. And, you know, Freud talked about the narcissism of small differences, right? So anytime I've got mates from outside of Ireland, they come to Dublin and we go drive to Belfast, say, oh, what's the difference? You kind of look the same. You kind of speak the same, you know, la la la. So Freud was trying to explain the differences in Middle Europe between Czechs and Slovaks and blah, blah, and described it as the narcissism of small differences. So like I hear these pathetic conversations, people say, oh, your man says bacon, and I say rashers. You know, like, you know, this is ridiculous bullshit. My sense is that it's always the more dominant power has to be the most generous, and that's real leadership. Is rather than amplify the anxieties of the East Belfast Rangers supporting. I mean, I heard this morning or recently that Bombardier is up for sale, and that's a big blow to East Belfast, right? And rather than celebrate that or in some way say nah, you shouldn't have voted for Brexit because they're all related. I think that we've got to be incredibly generous to them. It's, you know, like we've got to find our inner Mandela. And I really mean that, like Mandela putting on the Springbok jersey and saying to white Afrikaners, you're my people too. These gestures are hugely important.
Well, we've said you've married Luke MacDonald walking behind to get the British out of Ireland.
I mean, that's not gonna move Irish unification forward 1 inch.
Okay, Dave, before we go, then you did mention the podcast you've started.
I'm really excited. It's launched this week. It's the David McWilliams podcast. You know, over the years, what I've been really into doing, as you know, Dion, is trying to make economics as accessible to as many people as possible. And it struck me that podcasting is a really, really good way of explaining economics. You know, explaining your thoughts and what I'm always intrigued is that how many people say, I don't get that, or it's too hard for me, or that's not the sort of stuff I do. And so the aim of the podcast is going to be a weekly podcast. It's going to have various different layers of content in it, but the basic podcast is going to be a conversation with, actually it's really interesting, you mentioned Windsor Park, my oldest mate, a fellow who I was born a couple of months before, right? He's a sound engineer. He's been all over the world. Really old mate of mine, a guy called John Davis. And he and I have been mates all our lives, had chats in pubs and whatever. And he is sitting down talking to me every week about different ideas. And so John was kind of, his thing is like, I don't get that. Explain that again. And it's something that I'm really, really looking forward to. I'm really looking forward to it. And it's, again, podcasting is an extraordinary opportunity that technology has afforded. And my idea is I would love for just one extra person in Ireland to listen to that and say, I get it. You know, it's funny, when I'm teaching in Trinity, what I love about teaching is you watch the students come in baffled, and then gradually you can see their faces lighting up as like, oh yeah, that's how it works, and okay, I didn't think of that. So the podcast will be aimed at making economics as open, as accessible and uncomplicated as possible.
And economics to you is just a foundation for so much, and it's about more than what a lot of times what people think it is, isn't it?
Economics, Dion, is only about people. It's about us. And the rules of economics are simply the framework through which you can look at the world, and I think understand the world a lot better than if you don't have a framework. So that's my objective, is to try and get as many people as possible to twig what's going on. If we just go back, we talked a lot about the crash, and we talked about, you know, if people were only a little bit more informed about what was going on, they wouldn't have made those mistakes, and they'd save themselves a massive headache. And the way we avoid those sort of events again are through knowledge and education and wisdom.
And when you talk about everything, this is like you talk about leadership and you talk about people, actually a lot of things in Ireland seem to have been driven from the bottom, like change, you know, the population being ahead of the leaders. So maybe this is another example of it. Maybe Northern Ireland, we just talked about, will be another example where the leadership emerges from the communities rather than from the politicians.
Absolutely. You know, the lesson of democracy over the last 200 years is personal liberation. And those moments where you say, you know what, screw you, I don't believe you. And you can only have that sense of personal sovereignty if you acquire the knowledge. And the knowledge comes in all sorts of ways. It doesn't have to come from books, it can come from everything in ways. But that voyage of personal liberty I find very exciting.
David, we'll leave it there. That was fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Dion. Thanks very much.
Well, that was David McWilliams. Found it really fascinating talking to him, especially a lot of the stuff around the bank guarantee and how that happened, which I think is kind of the pivotal moment in modern Irish life, and David's role in it is fascinating. Before we go, don't forget again to subscribe to us on all the usual channels, and if you like the show, please give it a review. We'll see you next week. Bye.